Hello and welcome to this video. We're going to take a look at the free gift which is available currently from Arturia of the Filter MS-20. So this is a recreation of a classic filter and it's available for free, but it's not available for long because I believe the deal runs out on the 2nd of December. So you need to get on this pretty quick. But hopefully this will allow you to start your new year with a new and interesting filter to work with. So go to arturia.com. If you need to, you can create an account. You can have a look by clicking Discover. But it's the pretty straightforward deal of clicking Get it for free. You'd sign into your account. Click Add the license to your account. It'll get added to your account. It may take a few minutes for that to happen, but once it does, it will be available. Then you will need to download it. Now, this is done, as is often the way, with their own software center. So this is the Arturia software center. Generally, I found this reasonably reliable, but it's occasionally has the odd glitch here and there. But we'll run through just downloading it, as I'm going to download it onto my shiny new Mac. So first things first, on the page you were just on, you'll click download the ASC. So it should select the right version for you, as seen here, and then you can run that and install it. The installation is much the same on Windows. Basically, just take all the defaults and you'll be all good. And then you can run the software center and sign in. I'm just going to copy and paste this from my password manager, but obviously you'll need the email address and password that you used to sign in to the Arturia account. And once you're signed in, your licenses will be synchronized with your account on the software manager. If this is the first time you've installed it, it'll ask you where you want to put it. Because I'm on a Mac, I'm actually going to put it on the default. But if I was on my main DAW, I would put it somewhere else because I have separate drives for different things. But obviously, this is the point at which you can decide to do that. And obviously, it's up to you if you agree to share the data on usage with Arturia. And of course, you can change this at any time. Generally, I tend to do this with software companies, music software companies, because generally they're not trying to spy on your shopping habits. Until we find out that they are, of course. So here you can see some other Arturia products which I've got. So I'm only going to install the MS-20. So it's this slightly weird order here where you click Activate first and then you install it. Kind of the opposite to most software manufacturers, but basically click the button twice. Wait for it to download, as you'll see here, and then once it's finished downloading, it will then install it, and then you should be good to go. So here we're on Cubase, and as you can see, I've got a few tracks set up, and most of them have come from Media Bay, but this particular one has come from the Loopmasters Welcome Sample Pack. Anyway, let's just have a listen to it. So I'm just going to bypass the filter, and it's just a bass drum and some percussion. So the reasons for that will become apparent in a few seconds. Now, in terms of bypassing, there's a few different places you can do it. You can do it obviously with Cubase's bypass. There's also this switch on the back, which is quite funky. You can turn it on and off there. And you've also got a bypass control here, which does the same thing. It's toggling that switch. I guess they thought you'd miss that. Anyway, let's have a listen. So the default is classic parallel distortion. So we're just going to have a listen to that. And you can hear straight away, it's got that classic sort of resonant sound on the bass drum in particular. So let's take a listen just to the distortion side of things at the moment, because the filter isn't doing anything. So the distortion, we can go from no drive up to full-on shredding distortion. So, you know, we've got a fair range there. Now, what I like about this, which I've said on several other things, is we've got a dry and wet control. So here, we're not just getting just the distortion, because if you have just the sound of the distortion, it's actually not so pleasant. So having some distortion, but also the clean, clear sound in there is pretty good. We've got nice low cut and high cut controls, which mean we can, for instance, in this case, take the distortion off of the bass, but leave it on the percussion. So if we bring the low cut up, We're getting less distortion on the bass, which is quite nice. So you can play around with that. And we've got high cut as well. So you can make it sound properly trashy, etc. So that's pretty nice. And then we've got an output control, so you can control the output of the distortion side of things, which obviously is going to interact with the dry and wet control, but it's useful to be able to turn that down because sometimes you want loads of distortion, but you might want the level fairly low, or vice versa. You might not want much distortion, but you might want a loud version of that. So it's good to have control over all of that. Now next, let's take a look at the filter section. So I'm just going to turn this all the way dry, so we have no distortion. And the filter, now the filter is quite interesting. So let's go back to the beginning. So in the default, the high pass is set to 0, low pass is set to 10, and the cutoff will either turn the low pass down if you go to the left, or it will turn the high pass up if you go to the right. So even if you don't touch these controls, you're getting the classic sound to the left of a low pass filter, but also you're getting a high pass filter to the right. And you've got individual peak resonance controls for each of these. So if we turn this to the left and we're just hearing the low pass, you can hear we can go pretty much where we want. We'll see some more about that in a minute. And same goes for high pass. So resonance on high pass filters tends to be less of a sort of popular option because it doesn't just give you that same kind of sound, but you can still follow the frequency that it's at by turning that up. So, and the stereo control, this changes the left and right, high pass and low pass. So you're getting an unbalanced effect in terms of the filtering. And if you listen to this on headphones, like this, it's quite different than when it's this way. In fact, you can hear as I move the stereo control. It's like the sound's moving from one to the other. So yeah, you've got some stereo control there, so you can effectively change the high pass and low pass balance in left and right ears, which is, again, another interesting little function in there. So there's plenty to see there. Now, let's stick it on the next track and look at how it affects differently on different material. So here we are on that second track. Let's just listen to that bypass. So Tech House synth loop, as it says here. You can find this in Media Bay pretty easily. And the first thing you notice is the distortion doesn't have the same kind of effect on this as it did on the drum loop we heard earlier. So we need a bit more to really hear that in there. But the reason I want to listen to this is, let's say we decide we're going to play around with this filter a bit and bring this in. At the moment, we're hearing the distortion, then the filter. But if you swap it round with this button here, we get quite a different sound. And we've got that filtering sound, but we're getting distortion after it, which is pretty different to, so it's almost as if we don't have distortion in there, because a lot of the harmonics which the distortion is creating, the filter is taking out. Whereas here, we're clearly hearing that and the effect that that has on the sound. So playing around with the order of this, as any guitarist knows, the order of the effects that you put on really changes their sound and their interaction with each other. So that's something to be aware of. And again, not everything has that. Obviously, you can do that with separate items if you've got them as inserts, but it's much easier to just do this than it is to swap inserts around, even though it's pretty easy in Cubase. Final couple of controls I want to look at. The output control, which is useful to have. So this is the mix here. So we can go from 0 mix to 100% mix. Typically you want it on 100% mix, but just like we've got dry wet control here, we can sometimes Want to bring that down, maybe let a bit of the original through. And we've also got the effect level. So if we're at 100% mix as we are here, this is going to be a level control because this is controlling just the level. Again, this is going to interact with this depending on what you've got set here. But again, it's useful to have all these, it's a really nice touch. It's the kind of thing you might not need it in most situations, but when you do, it means you don't have to play around with maybe setting up a parallel effects channel and mixing it that way. You can just do it all in here. Now, in terms of other controls which are available on here, we've got a list of presets which are nicely accessible. You can see there are a lot, particularly in the filter section. And there's a few in the modulation, and the nice one, template default, that just basically resets it to do nothing, which is a nice starting point to have. Other controls, we're going to look at movement control a bit later for reasons that will become apparent. Now, the limit resonance control. So this is a way of making sure you don't go deaf. An unbounded filter can generate really, really high levels. So if you click this button to turn the limit off, you can see it gives you a warning. It says by disabling the limit resonance feature, it can self-oscillate and produce loud tones at certain settings. So this is definitely what I used to warn people about in classroom sessions with actual physical analog synths, because it's possible to make this make a really loud sound. And if your headphones are turned up to be potentially loud, you can hurt your hearing, okay? I'm not actually going to mess with this on this place, but if you press the nuclear, okay, I get it button, then you can make this self-oscillate. Oh, in fact, let's do it. Let's just do this. Okay, so I'm going to make sure this is turned down later on in the video so it doesn't make us all deaf, but I'm probably going to go deaf at this point. Great. Right, so now the limit is turned off, and if we bring the filter down, you can hear it's already self-resonating, and we're only at 70%. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to turn that back up. Okay, so if we went further with this, which I'm not going to do, it would resonate at the drop of a hat. So we can hear the filter frequency if we bring it down. Now, if you're not getting accurate enough control on here, on the Mac, it's control and click will allow you to do fine tuning. Normally it's shift and click on most things. I haven't checked this on PC because I want to get this video out to you today, which is why this is kind of a live stream rather than actually a normal recording. So it will be another modifier key that will allow you to do that, and then you can tune it so you don't get those steps. But if the peak, the resonance is turned up, it will self-oscillate at an earlier value and do so more as well. So if I was to turn that up, you can hear it's much more likely to do that. I'm going to turn that off for the rest of the video because I don't want to have a problem with anybody going, oh, it was terrible, you killed my ears. Anyway, the other options, clean. So let's have a listen to this because we've got two filter modes. We've got clean and dirty, and they sound significantly different. So let's just set this up, just to have a bit of filtering on there. And if we change from clean to dirty mode, you can hear we've got some distortion in the filter. Switch back to clean. And in fact, let's take a look at that on this next track, because this one I think will highlight this a bit better. So here we are with this, just a track which has got a bit more in there. And if we change that from clean to dirty, you can hear it sounds significantly different on this. So this is definitely one of those plugins where it reacts differently to different input material, and you can spend quite a bit of time just experimenting with it, because it's not that the controls totally change, but it's much more, not inconsistent, it's much more interesting in that it won't always do exactly, not necessarily what you think. This is obviously always going to bring in more distortion, but the way that it does so may surprise you sometimes. So going between clean, and we get a sort of, you know, underworld kind of sounding sound out of that when it's in dirty mode. We've got bypass. We've got undo, redo, and history, which is really nice. So we can find the history of what's been done. So you can see filter mode being changed, cut off, etc. All the things that have been done previously, and you can just step backwards through them quite a way, which is pretty nice. Finally, we've got a CPU load indicator, which doubles as a panic. So you can just make sure everything just gets turned off in case of things going crazy. We've also got A/B, so you can switch between A and B mode here, and by default they will copy each other, but as soon as you change, let's say to B mode, change that, you can see, you can flick between the two to compare sounds. Quite nicely. You can copy from one to the other, so whichever one you're on, you can copy to the other one with this button, because this changes function, so now it'll be B to A, so we could copy that back to A, and then vary fully. So you can audition your changes or just switch quickly between diverse settings. But the one thing we haven't looked at is the advanced button. And that brings up the modulation, and that's what we're going to be looking at next. So clicking the advanced button, as you can see here, brings up the modulation section. And we've got 3 modulation sources. So we've got an envelope follower, we've got a step sequencer, and we've got a function generator. Now, the first thing about these is you may think they're not working because initially this display doesn't show anything. So if I play this synth back, we're not seeing anything in here. And the reason is this doesn't get activated until you turn one of these on. And it's turned on with these controls here. So each control, for the most part, has 3 of these, and the first one is the envelope amount. So let's say we want to just control this master cutoff with an envelope. As soon as we turn this on, you can see the display at the bottom has started working. Okay, so we're seeing the audio input, but we're also seeing this green line, which is the envelope follower. So this is following that level, and I can change the sensitivity, so how much it's picking up. So you can see there it's not much. If I turn it up a lot, and you can hear the filter opening, which is working pretty well. So this is like the classic thing you found on a lot of these semi-modular analog synths. Certainly my SH09 had an external input for the filter, so you could filter audio through it, but this is sort of next level where you can use it as a trigger level, and it will sense that and alter the controls accordingly. So we could alter all these controls. I'm just going to stick with the master cutoff because it's the best thing to displaying what's going on, so you can see what's actually happening. So we've got that, so we can pick how sensitive it is here, and obviously pick how much it's affecting it here. So you can make it really, you can see this low pass is really opening up. So in fact, let's bring that cutoff down. So that's really having an effect there. If you want to reset it, you can just double click to take it back to 0, and you see this stops working then. But let's just put it back to about where we were. Now, we've got 3 controls here which allow us to alter the way that this behaves. Now, the rise and fall are a bit like attack and decay. So if we turn the rise up, you can see it's taking longer to start, and you can hear it's taking longer. So even if I turn the sensitivity right up, I can sort of smooth it out with a rise time. And we can make the full time longer as well. And you can see there it's staying up because the full time is so long. So playing around with these controls will allow you to control the way the envelope follower follows that sound and make it not just trigger it totally faithfully, because sometimes you've got something where it's varying so quickly that the envelope follower will just vary too much. So now the interesting thing here is the delay. So I've not got this tempo synced to Cubase, so sync isn't going to work particularly well, but you can set it synced or triplets, etc. But we can delay the envelope follower from the audio. See there, you can hear that it's taking a bit of time. So this whole thing is delayed, so we can hear that effect there. And obviously, if you do that in a musical manner and make that follow in a musical way, so maybe it's an 1/8 or a 16th or dotted, etc. behind, it would be much more interesting. So that's the envelope follower. So let's look next at the step sequencer. Now, one thing I forgot to mention earlier on is you can resize the window. So this little hamburger sort of menu here, we can resize it. So let's make it bigger for the sake of the rest of the video, so we can see this a little better. So step sequencer is next up. Now, this, as you can imagine, is a step sequencer which runs at this rate here. So it's synced in this case. So you can set it to hertz if you want to go, you know, a little experimental, etc. Have it synced to triplets or dotted. The one slightly unhelpful thing is this still reads 0 to 10, but it tells you when you hover over it what musical division you're at. So let's set it at 16ths. And in this case, I'm just going to play it on this sort of synth wave brassy sound here. So we've got plenty to filter out. It's not really doing that much. You'd probably come up with a more musical example, but it will be fine for our purposes today. So if we just play this now, again, let's just dial in a bit of cut off and then set this second knob, the sequencer amount. So there you can hear that's working straight away. And you can hear the steps in there. So if you want to, you can smooth those out if you want, but let's just so for those kind of trancey gate things from back in the 90s, and we've got some interesting options here. So we can run this forwards, we can run it backwards, we can run it bidirectionally, or we can run it randomly. So here it's just randomly picking steps and playing them. So that's a pretty useful set of options there. In terms of the editing, so by default, if you just click and slide on any column, you will be able to set at that particular point. You can reset the entire thing here. By default, you're in pencil mode. You can also do a sort of raising mode where you click and drag to another column, and then you can imagine you're creating a line and it will do that. It's slightly unintuitive until you get what you're doing. It's, yeah, I find it just, it doesn't quite work every time the way you'd expect it to work. So maybe I'm just mismousing, but yeah, once you get the hang of it, you can create ramps pretty quickly. So I can just click on this first one and then bring that down. Yeah, so that works for that kind of thing. You've also got the eraser, which allows you to erase those whenever you want. And you can control the loop length. So if you want to do 15s and be a bit, you know, interesting with it varying over time, you can do that. And you can have randomness around each value as well. So you can see there, it's changing every time. So if we play this, so it's based on this, but there's some randomness in there. So let's move this line up, and then we can have. Now the other button here is bipolar. So what this allows you to do is to make this go positive as well as negative. So if we put this to here, we can see at the moment it's just making positive moves. So even without hearing it, you can see that the filter is only going to the right, as it were, which is activating the high pass. If we make it in bipolar mode, it's doing both. So it's and we can control the swing as well. So we've got the ability to control that by, I think it's slightly different than your average swing because 50% is zero swing. I think this is actually saying where the halfway point between two notes is. So by making it 75, that's what that sounds like to me anyway. So that's the step sequencer, and we've still got one more modulation source to look at, and that's the function generator. So let's take a look at that now. So this is the function generator. Activating it works in exactly the same way as you'd expect. So we can just do exactly what we would expect there. So we'll turn the master cutoff down and turn this up. This will be very familiar to anybody who's used FX Modulator or indeed edited automation in a reasonably modern version of Cubase. So we've got points that we can add, and we can also control the curve of that line. And that works really nicely. So straight away, you can come up with some interesting patterns. We've got some presets here. So if you need a sine wave, I'm not a mathematician. I'm not sure that's exactly a sine wave, but maybe it is. Maybe the scaling of this is a bit off, but it's handy to have this kind of thing ready for you. You can, of course, control the rates. At the moment, we're controlled by 1 bar. So let's just... So there you've got a 1... In this case, a 1 bar cycle of a sine wave. We've got some other things. And obviously, if you're sending this to multiple modulation targets, you can have a pretty interesting time with that. This is whether or not things snap to a vertical separator. Yeah. Does kind of snap, but it's not mega sticky snap. So yeah, that's working okay, but it's not going to save you if you're a total loon with a mouse. This one is quite interesting. So you drag this vertically and it randomly alters the amplitude of these parts. So you see, as I drag this, they're all randomly changed. So you can get some variations. You can put it back to where you were, which is quite nice. So, and not all of them get affected the same way. You know, it's nice and random. So I'm sure with a few throws of the dice, you can totally transform what you had. You can see that's pretty different. And handily, we still have the undo, which is super useful with this particular kind of editor. In terms of editing, so we've got this here, which is creating an individual point. So this is the default. So if I click here, you can see it's created a new point, which I can then drag around to my heart's content. This will create square steps. So if you click here, you can see we're now creating those squares, which is useful if you want to create a sort of step kind of thing, because otherwise you've got to create 2 points and make sure they're at the same level. So this makes it easy, but when you go back, you can then edit those individually as well. So you're not limited by that. And then a similar thing, which allows you to do ramps. So as you drag along, you've got ramp up or ramp down. So you can create the kind of things which are in the presets. You can create them reasonably easily, but obviously it's nice to have those available. It hasn't got all the editing you might want, so you know the ability to highlight multiple points, etc., isn't in there. But ultimately, this is modulation as part of an effect. If you want to get really pernickety, this area here shows the point that you're editing and the time and the level. So if you want mathematical precision, you can do so by saying, oh, actually, this should be at 0.5, not a 0.499, although 0.5 is probably being blocked because that's where that one is, etc. That kind of thing. But yeah, you can definitely, exactly fine tune where your level needs to be and so on. So there's plenty in here. The last thing is the scale. This controls ultimately the scale of this, how much it affects that. So if I turn that down as I go, so although those points stay in place, which is quite nice in terms of editing because it means it's much easier to do and it's not all cramped down at the bottom of the screen, the scale control can even be inverted so you can have the reverse of what you had. So that's certainly a nice little touch. Now, the last control I want to mention on here is the movement control. So this is an overall automation amount control. So if I turn this down, you can see the filter has stopped jiggling about. So this effectively turns all of these down. So let's say you'd set up multiple modulations. and you wanted to calm things down a bit, then you can do it just by bringing this movement control down. So this is an overall modulation amount control, which reduces all of these in sync, which is really nice because, you know, sometimes you go a bit far and you think, I just need to back that off. Or it will also be a useful automation target because you can start out with maybe no movement and then build it up to lots of movement later on and bring all that in rather than having to program all of these controls being changed individually. So yeah, there's lots of nice stuff there. So let's just take a look at what's available as automation targets. So one of the things which has happened with a lot of plugins recently, I've seen quite a few plugins where not everything has been available as an automation target, but here trying to add a parameter in Cubase, you can hopefully see that a whole load of them are available, which is nice. So we've got relevant things for each of the modulation sources and also each of the knobs here. So you can control pretty much everything. And as I mentioned earlier, the movement control is probably one of the ones you're going to want to spend a bit of time automating because you can bring in your modulation globally like that. And obviously being able to alter the filter controls, which are probably the master cutoff one. So that's probably the main one you're going to want to automate. And that's at the top of the list, which is nice. So that's clearly been thought about. So that's the Arturia Filter MS-20 plugin, which is more than a filter, as you've already seen. So obviously having distortion in there is nice. Being able to swap the order is nice, but the modulation, I think, is the real sweet spot of this because there's so much to experiment with. Clearly, if we look at this here, we can see we've got lots of presets to go through, and a lot of these will have modulation set up on them. So we can see on each of these, you know, some of these have got this just happening here and there, etc. I've not been through all the presets because I haven't had time and I wanted to get this out. So hopefully some of you will get this before it stops being free, because this plugin is free until January the 2nd, 2023. After that, it's going to be $100. And that doesn't actually surprise me because there's plenty of it. But this is clearly the time to get it because free is always better than $100, surely. There's plenty of things to recommend this. Apart from anything else, it's a nice, straightforward plugin which has got options that you can look at later on. So even if you just used it as a filter and just took advantage of the control of the filter and the ability to use clean and dirty modes, and you didn't use anything else, it would probably be a useful filter to have because it sounds pretty good. I like the sound of it, but given the fact you can also have it self-resonate, so you can turn off limit resonance and make it go just crazy, and you've got so much modulation to play around with. There's so many options here. You could be really, really creative with just this one plugin. I'm not a huge fan of get every plugin that you can because it's easy to just end up thinking that it's just a collecting game and there will be a plugin which will fix everything. And that's not the case. Generally, you can make good music with stock plugins for the most part, but some things you do need plugins. I don't think there is a standard plugin which comes with Cubase, for instance, where the filter will work and automate in this way and sound like this. I'm sure some people have a different opinion on that, but it definitely doesn't have all of these options available to it. I know there's FX Modulator, but I prefer the sound of this particular filter. And also, I think this is a much more accessible tool to work with. So overall, obviously, when it's free, I think it's a great plugin. $99. Yeah, it depends whether you want this particular plugin, of course. You know, if you want this sound, then maybe it's the thing to go for. And if it's something you're going to use a lot, it seems a little steep at $99, to be honest. I would have, without looking, I would have said probably it was a $50 plugin, but each to their own. Anyway, it's free at the moment, so go and grab that. And as ever, I hope you found this video useful. And if you have, please like, subscribe, comment, etc. And we'll see you again soon for more music tech tuition.